we are going to look at chord movement. So when you take a group of chords, even though they can kind of go from chord to chord any way they want to, there is certain ways that chords want to move that sound pleasing to the human ear. And so we're going to look at this. And in order to look at it and really understand it, we're going to have to write down the number system scale. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember, these are the intervals of the major scale, 7 notes. But when you look at chord progression theory, each of these notes have chords built upon them to make 7 chords in a specific key, whatever you decide. Well, the most important chord, I would say, out of all of these chords will be the number 1 chord. This chord right here. And number 1 chord represents home. And that is why most songs start with the number 1 chord and they end with the number 1 chord. It doesn't have to, but most of them do. And another way you can look at the number 1 chord, which by the way is a major chord, is it's a sign of something that is resolved. Home, resolved. Okay. Now, what does the 1 chord want to resolve from, you might be asking. And this is the part that I wanted to show you in this lesson. Now, when you look at all these 7 chords, the chord that is the closest tied to the 1 chord, as in the sense of resolving and going home, is the 5 chord. Let me put this in a different color. So this 5 chord just wants to resolve to this number 1 chord. And in fact, this relationship, the 5 chord going to the 1 chord, has been basically how music has been written for hundreds and hundreds of years. And the reason why, I'm trying to understand this myself, but for some reason, we as human beings like to have things that's not just home, that's safe and resolved, but we want to see things that have tension, that's away from home, that comes home. You go to any movie and you're going to find it's not just something that's good and it just stays there. It's boring that way. There has to be something that's good, but something that's kind of bad, or something bad happens, and at the end of the movie, it gets resolved. A lot of times in action movies, there's a good guy, there's a bad guy, and at the very end, there's a fight between the bad guy and the good guy, and almost all the time, not always, but the good guy wins, so it goes home, and it leaves the moviegoers feeling satisfied, like justice was served. And there is that type of psychology going on in songs and music all the time. And the greatest example of this is this interaction between the 5 chord and the 1 chord. Okay? Now, when you look at chord theory, the 5 chord is also a major chord if you're looking only at 3 notes. Here, let me write this real quick. 5 is tension. That's a great word to describe the 5 chord. 5 wants to come home. And one of the reasons why is because just naturally the 5 pulls to the 1. We're going to look at this in the next lessons on chord movement, but 5 to 1 is a leap of a fourth. Okay, and I'm going to describe this in the next one a little bit, but notes tend to want to move in fourths. So 5 wants to go to 1. But the other part is because of what I'm about to show you. Now, for this example, I'm going to have to write a couple other numbers. So here, I'm going to go and write the scale again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But I'm going to continue on. 1. 7 goes to 1, starts all over. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's all I have room for. So if you look at the number 1, or actually, yeah, number 5 chord, get another color here. There we go. Okay, if you look at the 5 chord, this 5 chord is built off of the notes 5. You remember, chords are formed by skipping every other note. The next note after 5, if you skip one, is 7, is 2. Now, this note right here, the 7, in a scale, always, just the note by itself, always wants to go up to 1. 7 always wants to go up to 1. That is why technically the 7 note is called the leading tone. It leads to 1. And you can't just stop at 7. Like if I were to hum the major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It sounds completely incomplete. And the only way that you can complete that 1, you have to go up to the 1. Okay? So built into this 5 chord is this 7th note that wants to resolve to 1. But there's another reason why. If you look at 4-note chords, which kind of sounds a little more jazzy, and I were to build this 5th chord, 5, 7, 2, and I were to add one more note to it, I would skip 3 and go to 4, and I would hit this 4th note. So these 4 notes together create what's called a dominant 7th chord. Dominant 7th. And then when you play a dominant 7th, there's so much tension that it wants to resolve to the 1 chord. One of the reasons why is because, remember, or I should say earlier, I mentioned that 5 wants to go to 1. There's this pull of how notes travel in, it wants to move up a 4th. There's also this 7 note within the 5 chord, leading tone, that wants to go to the 1 note. But when you add a 4th note to this chord, this 4 notes want to resolve down to 3. Okay? A lot of times when a chord involves a 4th note, in fact, not a lot of times, but the times when there is a 4th note, it's technically called a suspended chord. Some kind of a suspended. And when things are suspended, they want to fall. They want to drop. They want to land. And that's exactly what the 4 does. The 4 wants to be suspended and resolve down to the 3. So let's look at this. When you have a dominant 7th chord, which starts on the 5 note, you have these 4 tones. You have, first of all, this 5, which wants to travel to 1 because that's the 4th up from 5. You have this 7 leading tone that wants to resolve up to 1. That's just built into this scale. And you have this 4 that wants to pull down to the 3, which, because it's suspended, it wants to come down to 3. Now, if you look at this 5 wants to go to this 1 note. Okay? This 7 wants to go to this 1 note. And you got this 4 that wants to go to this 3 note. So you have 2 notes from the 5 chord, 7 to 1, and you got another note, 4 to 3, that want to go to 1 and 3, and plus this just single note movement from 5 to 1. So 1 and 3, along with the 5 note, create the number 1 chord. So this is the most important and the absolute beginnings of understanding chord movement, that the 5 chord wants to move to the 1 chord. And remember, they're both major chords when you're looking at 3 notes, but as soon as you add a 4th note, it becomes a dominant 7th chord on the 5, which wants to go to 1. Away, home, tension, release, resolved.